Bon après-midi. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this panel on how to ensure local acceptability, coexistence, and co-use in the offshore wind sector. This event is organized jointly between Team Norway and the French Wind Association FEE. My name is Ellie Rognerud. I work for Innovation Norway, and I'll be your chair and moderator this evening, together with my colleague Mathieu Monnier, Deputy Director of the FEE. To shed light on this very important and engaging topic, we also have with us a distinguished panel of guests this afternoon. To my right, the Norwegian Minister of Petroleum and Energy, Tina Bru. VP of Equinor for offshore wind, Sonja Indrebø. To the left of the other panel side there, Deputy Director of Pôle Mer Bretagne, Phil Mombé. Gro Saint-Martin, Director for Offshore Wind at the French TSO RTE. And last but not least, Vincent Ballet, Managing Director of WPD Offshore France. Welcome. Before we start us off and fire away at our panel, however, we would like to hear a couple of words from you, Mathieu. What do we actually mean by local acceptability, and why is this an important topic for us engaged in offshore wind?
Madam Minister, dear colleagues and friends, very glad to be here. Actually, local acceptability is a very tough concept to define. It means different things according to different stakeholders, and also in France we tend to understand acceptability like a project without conflict and without legal issues, which is basically impossible for infrastructure projects in France. We love debates, and I think it's natural to debate and to oppose different views. But after a few years of experience for offshore wind projects in France, we can see that we prefer to speak about adhesion to a project better than acceptability. I do not only accept a project, I participate in this project. I'm an actor, and I try to improve different aspects of this project in order to make sure that people feel that the project is part of the territory and close to their own identity, because you do not lead a project of Brittany like you do it in the Mediterranean Sea. So it plays on jobs creation, environmental aspects, cultural, let's say, aspects in the project. How do you are part of the, let's say, the local culture and the region, and how do you speak to people? So it means different things, and I'm sure that the colleagues will illustrate that a lot.
Thank you, Matthew. So obviously a complex topic, and one also with some vested controversy. We look forward to hearing from our panelists some of the best practice and experience that you have from your various projects. But let's, it's late in the afternoon, you're brave people. Let's start us off with a couple of visuals and a short movie before we fire away. Is there sound on that?
Vital to fulfill the Paris goals and halt climate change. And Europe has a bold ambition to install more than 400 gigawatts offshore wind capacity in the next decades. And we believe Norwegian experience and technology can help realize that ambition.
Des générations de maîtrise de conditions océaniques extrêmes ont donné aux entreprises norvégiennes une compétence unique pour l'éolien offshore. Notre industrie est désormais tournée vers l'avenir, utilisant sa chaîne d'approvisionnement hautement qualifiée pour explorer des eaux plus profondes et réduire les coûts, tout en réduisant l'empreinte environnementale.
Equinor developed the first floating offshore wind turbine, Hywind Demo, outside Karmøy in Norway more than 10 years ago. Following that, we built the Highland Scotland outside Aberdeen, a 30 megawatt of floating offshore wind farm. And now we're following up with an even bigger wind farm, Hywind Tampen, off the west coast of Norway. Equinor also just won the tender on a 3.3 gigawatt offshore wind project outside New York, powering more than 1 million American homes. And now, France really has the potential to become a European leader on floating offshore wind. And we hope to contribute.
La France a de grandes ambitions pour l'éolien en mer. Notre objectif est d'atteindre 5 à 6 gigawatts de capacité éolienne en mer installée d'ici 2028. Un appel d'offres est actuellement en cours au large de la Normandie. Il est ouvert aux acteurs français et internationaux et d'autres appels d'offres devraient suivre dans les prochaines années.
Pour pouvoir développer l'éolien en mer en concurrence avec les énergies fossiles, les coûts doivent baisser. C'est pour ça qu'il faut résoudre un certain nombre de difficultés techniques, des sujets économiques et régulatoires, en bénéficiant de la concurrence et de la coopération internationale. L'objectif du groupe de travail franco-norvégien vise précisément à adresser ces défis et à trouver des solutions ensemble.
L'éolien flottant ne peut être compétitif que si les coûts baissent. C'est pour cela que nous avons besoin de le développer à grande échelle. Aujourd'hui, EDF fait partie d'un consortium qui va tester la première éolienne flottante de plus de 10 MW, avec le soutien de l'Europe, avec des partenaires norvégiens, des tests qui seront effectués au centre d'essai des énergies marines dans l'ouest de la Norvège.
Dans le cadre du développement des énergies marines renouvelables, l'éolien offshore est sans doute le secteur le plus dynamique. Il nécessite néanmoins l'implication et l'intervention de différents secteurs du maritime. La France et la Norvège sont deux grands pays du maritime. Et il est important d'apprendre d'un autre pays comment relever ces défis pour le bon développement du secteur.
Notre coopération est ancienne et nous devons la renforcer dans l'avenir, notamment dans le domaine de l'éolien en mer. Nos ambitions sont alignées et nous devons ensemble relever le défi de la transition énergétique.
The Norwegian offshore wind industry consists of strong developers and a supply chain with large contractors, as well as niche suppliers. And together, they represent broad expertise in offshore environmental surveying, engineering, cables and electricity infrastructure, marine installations and operations, as well as digitalization and material handling. In addition, Norwegian offshore industry's strong reputation when it comes to health and safety make us a trusted partner.
You're all awake now? Great. Thank you. I want to start with you Ms. Bru. As the digital version of yourself just explained, Norway has some 50 years of offshore experience already. Norwegian actors were amongst the pioneers in floating offshore wind, and you just opened 2 areas for offshore wind development off the coast of Norway in the North Sea. Could you share a couple of reflections on what experiences Norway has made in ensuring local acceptability and coexistence between different marine sectors over the past 50 years, and what you're now looking to do to ensure this as you're opening new areas?
Yes, sure. Thank you. And thank you for the possibility of being here today. And I have to start by, of course, I'm pleased with myself. I think I said some smart things in that video. Thank God I haven't seen it before, so that was good. But yes, as you said, of course, Norway has over 50 years of experience in coexisting in our oceans, in our ocean space. Oil and gas, fisheries, the shipping and maritime sector, we've found ways to make it work for all of us. And that is something that we really have to take care of. We have to bring it with us now that we're moving into something that can be, hopefully, a big new industry for Norway. And that is also our approach to offshore wind in Norway. It's a possibility to build new industry. We're seeing the possibility to create new jobs. But that will only succeed if we have legitimacy, if we have the public opinion with us, and we manage to do this in a way that also takes care of the existing industries. And Norway has a long tradition of course, finding also plans and tools to make this actually work also politically. So we have Amongst other things, we have an integrated management plan for our ocean spaces that we've had since 2002, which balances all these different considerations, where environmental aspects are discussed, all kinds of different issues. And that's an important value that we have to now continue to use as we're moving into something else. And we've actually, because we've now opened 2 areas for offshore wind production, we've established what we call a cooperation forum. We just had our first meeting recently that brings together actors in the industry, NGOs, government authorities to try to figure out, okay, so how are we going to build this industry in a way that also makes sure that we can consider other users of the ocean. So fisheries, for example, are involved in this work, and they're split up into different kinds of working groups where we discuss issues for issues. And this is so important because we have some experience in Norway where it's only recently that we really had a lot of the onshore wind development happen. We've been talking about it for many years, and it was kind of like a catch-up effect. All of a sudden, a lot of the wind farms onshore started getting built, and this gave a huge pushback in public opinion. So we've learned a lot from that, and I think it's important not to repeat the mistakes. It's important to think that this is something that's not going to be conflict-filled just because right now they don't exist yet. But I'm pretty sure that once they start existing, this can be an issue if we don't do our homework now and plan for how we're going to tackle this issue before it's actually an issue.
Thank you. Those are very candid reflection. And you talked about the importance of policies and frameworks and also platforms for doing this and some experiences with it. But if I may follow up, what about the actual technologies and solutions, the installations themselves? Another issue that's been on the agenda is that of environmental design. So developing technologies and solutions that minimize natural impact. Could you say a few things about what that means and how it may actually help to raise local acceptability?
Well, I think we need to continuously develop our knowledge of the marine life and how this affects the environmental questions surrounding offshore wind, because we don't know enough yet, and we need to know more because this is potentially, or it's not even potential, it's going to be a global industry all across the world. And this is something we can all benefit from together, knowing more, getting more knowledge about how it affects the environment. But what we have done in Norway is, we have, of course, experience from what we've done on offshore oil and gas. When you, for example, plan to do seismic activities, you have to have a close cooperation with fisheries and the oil and gas companies to make sure you do it at times that are least harmful for the interests of the fisheries. Same kind of thing I think you should do on offshore wind. It can be about, these areas are huge. When you're planning where to actually place the turbines, can you make sure that you do that in a fashion that gives the least kind of impact in a negative way? And I think we're going to see continuous technology development on how to do this in the most, in a way that takes much care as possible to the surroundings. And I think we're just in the start of seeing that. Subsea technology, digitalization, everything to minimize the impact, I think is important. But this is something that Norway is not just Norway doing. A lot of countries are looking at this, and I think there's much to learn from each other here as well.
Thank you, very interesting. Let me with that turn to you, Phil. Phil Mombay, you're Deputy Director of Pôle Mer Bretagne. Well, knowing that Bretagne has, as a region, great ambitions for offshore wind developments and has announced, I believe, the world's first fully commercial tender for a floating offshore wind farm this year. And you represent one of the large marine clusters with different interests in obviously in your constituency and your membership group. Could you reflect a little bit about how you actually work to consolidate these or to mitigate some of these potential issues as Brittany develops its offshore wind agenda?
Thank you. Thank you, really, for that. First, before I talk about how we try to solve the issues, I just want to say that France is not really in advance regarding the development of offshore wind. There's 2 reasons for that. The first one is political choices. Well, obviously, we have great policies for nuclear power plants in France. And the second one is the topic of today, acceptability issues, which remain a major challenge. To put that back in perspective, at least in the western part of France, Brittany and Pays de la Loire, these two regions, it's more than 3,000 kilometers of coast. And just two figures for you, just that are really related to acceptability issues. 49% of the fishing fleets are located in the western part of France. And the two regions together, I mean, at least Brittany, sorry for Pays de la Loire, I think we are the second region in terms of tourism, even if it's raining a lot during summer in Brittany, but not in the same way. But that's give you why it's a difficulty, because there's plenty of activities in the area. I mean, in the coastal area, and so to put something new in the water, it's always difficult. So we're facing activities, mainly fishing, but also environmental concern and also landscape issues related to tourism. So to prevent that, we are involved in let's say, two kind of activities. The first one is to ease the discussion between stakeholders. As a cluster, we bring together academics, companies, and also professional organizations. It means that in my board meetings, I've got entities from fishing professional organization, but also big industrial players like former Naval Energy, but other players that are important to discuss this issue. So we try to make them talk. Obviously, there is a public consultation, the normal one, but we also are involved in different initiatives like a working group to try to improve the way we animate the discussion and to change the way we ask the question. We talk early in the afternoon. I don't think we ask the right question. It's not like you want an offshore wind farm or nothing. It's you want an offshore wind farm or maybe a nuclear power plant that has also impacts or regulation or constraints for everybody. So this all of this is important to try to promote discussion between the stakeholders. And there's also innovation. We promote innovation. So we try to help our members to develop some new technologies or new product, new services that will impact less the environment. So as a cluster, we really try to make the discussion happen beyond the public consultations that is probably not always easy.
Thank you. Very interesting. You have a formidable task, and I hear bringing them together and also asking, managing that discussion around the table and asking the right question seems to be a key issue. Can I ask as a follow-up? Sitting in your position close to a number of these actors, what would be your one key advice to international actors or French actors, for that matter, moving into this area? What do they need to do to make sure, or to bear in mind, to make sure that they further local acceptability in the best possible way?
I think they have to not be bossy when they arrive, even if they have won the tender. Just try to consider the other user of the sea. And I also like some approach of open innovation, like RTE did with a couse for the substation. It's some concrete things that help both parties, let's say, to work together. So we can only promote more discussion in an innovative way, a new way to approach the way we discuss, and we try. At least we're here to help all the parties to discuss together as a cluster.
Thank you. Good advice. I trust Norwegian and international and French actors took note, and also noted your kind invitation to be an accompanying advisor in that process. You made reference to the colleague to your left, RTE, the French TSO, Europe's largest TSO, I believe, and some of the projects that I know also RTE has for coexistence and co-use of the substations. RTE has taken a lead role in the development of French offshore wind, and from the Dunkirk project onward is in charge of all substations on French offshore wind farms, right? Could you explain a little bit the thinking behind this centralized or TSO built model and role, and what you think it does in terms of, well, it puts you in a position obviously where you have to manage some of this local acceptability, and what does the centralized role mean for that engagement? Gro.
Yeah, thank you, Ellie. It's a very good question, actually. What you refer to is what we call the TSO-led model. So that means that actually the TSO is responsible for the full assets from the offshore substation to the onshore grid. And this is a very interesting enabler for getting beyond the spaghetti connection model. Now, the spaghetti connection model, that's one wind farm and one connection. We try to go for shared assets. So one connection, several wind farms connected to that shared assets. It could go even further, hybrid assets, combining interconnections, and a connection of offshore wind farms. So this is the main advantage. But getting back to today's issue, which is more coexistence and co-use, you can find other advantages. One of them is being a trusted partner. I liked your notion of trusted partner. Actually, RTE is able to be there from the very start of the project during public debate phase, as we have now in the Mediterranean and soon in South Atlantic, hand in hand with the state, then during development and construction phase with our friends, the developers, and then afterwards, of course, during operation and maintenance. We're there all the time, from the start to the end, let's say, and hence we can be that trusted partner that is well known by stakeholder, and we can share experience also from across project, the 16 projects we carry out now. It is easier. We're also able to build partnerships with some of our main partners. For instance, the National Fishing Committee. There we've done some very concrete work, establishing a common guideline, best practice on how to inform each other, how to carry out surveys, operations in good coordination. Another example, this time with environmental NGOs. We work with NGOs such as WWF, Surfriders. We'll have a pitch tomorrow, by the way, with them, and others on consultation methods. How can we establish common consultation methods that are just and efficient? And they also help us as stakeholder panels to improve our life cycle analysis, for instance, on offshore substations. Another example. They give us really useful input to improve our projects. And then getting back to what you said, Phil, regarding the offshore multi-feature or multi-use platform, that is something we have also established and developed together with our partners, such as Pôle Mer Méditerranée, but also all the other environmental NGOs, fishermen, etc. Now, what does that mean? You often say that the offshore substation is the beating heart of the wind farm, and we thought that this heart could beat for other uses than just transmitting electricity, also doing other intelligent things of use for local communities and stakeholders. And hence we launched a call for tender in 2019, got 200 answers from many people, very interesting. And we selected some main awards, and one of them was, the main one was a local startup in Dunkirk who suggested to put on the substation a monitoring device to follow, to monitor sea waves in order to improve prediction of submersion risk. Very interesting, especially in this climate change context. And we also have suggestions from local fishermen in Brittany to look at how we can have coexistence between transmission assets and shellfish farming. So this is all very interesting.
It is very interesting. You gave a number of examples, both of dialogue models and sort of platform models, and concrete examples of actual co-use of the physical thing. I hope towards the end we'll come to the discussion on what might we learn from each other. I know, at least from a Norwegian perspective, that these very broad bottom-up public debates, 200 proposals for how to use a substation, is quite impressive from a Norwegian perspective. A good French tradition. We'll come back to that. But let me then pass with these concrete examples of operational activities and how they might foster coexistence and local acceptability. I would like to pass to you, Sonia. You are VP for floating offshore wind at Equinor, a major energy company with operations in 30 countries, I believe, and and you also have a French-Norwegian consortium bidding on one of the Brittany tenders at present. You have also been plant manager for the Highland Scotland floating offshore wind farm, and it would be really interesting to hear from you as a developer and operator on that wind farm or elsewhere, concrete examples of how you've worked with this issue, fostering local acceptability.
So, yeah, I would be very pleased to do so. So, first and foremost, just a little bit about Highland Scotland project to understand it. So, basically, Equinor piloted the world's first floating wind turbine, and that came into the water outside Norway in 2009. So, that was a very early test to see if this could actually work. It was, you know, a regular turbine that was put on top of this floater spar, which was something we were used to from oil and gas. We then moved that to wanting to build a wind farm, and working together with the UK, and the consent was given in 2015 to build this wind farm. The 2013, then the FID was taken in 2015, and then it came into the water in 2017. So that was quite a fast way of building this wind farm. And it's very much because of a very collaborative approach and being very open and opening up for dialogue with all the main stakeholders to invite people in with opinions, so that would actually make it more efficient. And also taking into account what advice you get and do something about it, not just collect it, but actually make changes to what you do. So since then, we put Highland into operations in November 2017. It's produced extraordinary. So that's also something to pay note to when it comes to all our ambitions to floating, is that it's the best performing UK wind farm for all the 4 years it's been in operations. And that is quite astonishing, thinking that this is actually completely different from the bottom fixed technologies, and it's taking a lot of work internally to make it happen. But on the collaboration side, what we've done is that already from consenting and early environmental studies, as I said, we invite in advice, and we've done changes, like it was mentioned, on marine life, making sure you only do work when it's less sensitive to certain mammals or other species that you need to take into account. We've moved turbines because that would make the layout better for other users. At the Hywind Tampen, which is the new wind farm we're now building outside Norway, which is going to power oil and gas installations, we actually changed the mooring on the edges to help and reduce the kind of dredging challenge. So those are examples where it's not just collaborative with regards to inviting, but it's actually doing those modifications and showing that we're listening and we actually want to bring this into account. So another thing we've done is that although we were the first floating wind farm of the world, we could easily just sit on that knowledge and try to be as exclusive as we can. But instead, we did the other opposite. We share our data on Highland Scotland openly through the Aura Catapult, which is an innovation hub in the UK where everyone can tap in, any company in the world, and actually get access to the data, so you can you do your own analysis and simulations and develop your own solutions on top of that. So that is the core of our values. Equinor is about open, collaborative, and then it's caring and courageous. And we also believe those values very much link to the partnership we now have in France with both RES and Green Giraffe. So we see that we share that way of actually addressing these projects. So these are things we were very keen to also look into for other geographies, like here in France. But we believe the fastest way to move a project is to be collaborative.
Okay. Thank you. That's interesting as a pitch for the economic upside of local acceptability as well. And I thought I would challenge you on some concrete changes that you'd made in response to input, but you gave us 4 or 5 or 10 up front, so I'll leave it to that. But you talked about data. I just wanted to then encourage you to speak a little bit more about one. I know a couple of projects that you've been looking at, one called the environmental DNA, a new model for actually doing that environmental assessment, because that is an issue. Do we actually know enough about what impact these construction projects have? And also the static fishing project, sort of testing fishing within the wind farms. This is an issue of great controversy. I mean, once the wind farm is there, can you actually still fish? You believe maybe yes, so.
Well, so yes, part of the putting the turbines into the water in the UK, there are some studies you need to do, and we did all of those. But we believe of going beyond, because the more we understand, the better we can design the next wind farms. So we've done much more than was expected, and parts of these are, we did this environmental DNA analysis, which is basically a way of sampling in your water column to see what kind of biomass is there. And by doing those analyses and then reperforming them over time, what we do expect to see is, are these actually artificial reefs? Is this actually supporting more marine life because of the fact that these turbines are there? And one of the things we also done is that part of we need to do regular surveys of our equipment to make sure it's safe and it does what it needs to do. But in addition, when we did the survey last year with an ROV, which we checked every inch underneath the water column of how the equipment looked like, we also invited in specialists to do more thorough understanding of what is actually the marine species that we saw. So what they did, they analyzed this much further, and they found there were no invasive species, which was good because we don't want to bring anything to an area. But they found 80 different species living and thriving on our structures. That report is also published. So if you go on equinor.com under environmental assessment, you will find the full report, 80 pages long, and that's also showing what's there. But then what we then saw that because of these species, could that actually mean that it will help marine growth over time? So that's what we're doing with the environmental DNA. And then we also had a very cool thing, because we also like innovations. We love innovations, and that's very much part of where we come from. So we actually had a surfboard travel all the way from Bergen, which is on the west coast of Norway, all the way over to Scotland on itself, only powered by solar panels and a small sail. And underneath, it was an echo sounder. So basically, it traveled autonomously all the way over to Scotland, and it traveled in the wind farm for 30 days. And it, by this echo sounder, could see what kind of fish is there. So again, we're sampling all of this to understand more. And then the last thing, which is where sorry for taking that long, but it's so exciting. We're working together with Marine Scotland, basically testing what we call static fishing inside the wind farm. So basically what we're looking into, although you can't do everything, like you can't do trawling, because then you'll pull potentially a cable and nobody wants to experience that. But what you can do is a lot of the various things we are testing. We're testing for pots. Can you actually put pots inside the wind farm? So can you use various other fishing methods? And this is a collaboration together with the authorities, and we'll do this during the summer of 2022. And again, we will publish the results, so we'll share with everyone.
Okay, thank you. Very interesting, and glad to hear that you're excited about this. We thought we'd save the hard talk for the end of the day, but you seem to be on it. I would like to also ask you, Vincent. WPD has been an active player in the French offshore wind development. How have you worked to consolidate the interests of different industries that are affected by these offshore wind projects from a developer perspective?
Yes, indeed. Thank you for the panel and the discussion and the opportunity to share this experience in France. Indeed, we started in 2008, and we are very happy to see now the start of construction of our projects, which is a very, very long run. And I wanted to share in this panel, and I appreciate your approach of taking lessons learned from that for your future wind farms. I wanted to share 3 examples, because you mentioned some controversy with other industries. So I guess there are 3 challenges. One is with fishermen, which might be the biggest one. The second is about NGO and environmental topics, and the third one is about tourism and landscape. Maybe let's start with the most difficult, with fishermen. Fishing activity, as you know, they don't have much border in their activity. So when you start discussing with fishermen, this is what we did in 2008. And when you ask them, okay, where do you fish? Where could we go? They just say, we fish everywhere, and you cannot go nowhere. So this is the first approach, the first answer. But after discussion, dialogue, and going into much detail, then you can identify area where there is less fishing activities, and then you can start developing a wind farm in this area. This is what we did in our Normandy project. For the western project we have there, it's a spot for fishing scallops. And scallops, it's a quite important fishing activity. They earn quite well with this, so it's a challenge to put a wind farm close to some scallops fishing activities. Then what we identified with the fishermen in 2010, after 2 years of work, was really the area where the stocks of scallop was the lowest possible, and then they were not fishing that much in this area. So this was 2010. We got a deal, we got an agreement with the fishermen in this sense. The point is that after that, we had a long process of development, not much because of us, but because it was the first project in France. So a lot of topic about administration, about public debate, about new rules, and so on and so forth. And then we are now in 2020, we start the construction, and the status of this stock has really changed. The tons of this area for scallops was multiplied by 10. So now we have also a lot of scallops in our future wind farm. So this is a challenge to really shrink the time between when you have a deal and when you start construction. Because if you lose too much time, or if it takes too much time, then the situation about fishing activities can change, and also the players you have in front of you can change also. They have, like politics, they have also mandates, or they have careers that can stop. And when you have agreement with some people, in 10 years it's too long, and it's better to go for 5 years development. So this is the first one about fishing activities. The second one about environmental topic and NGO. There, as you mentioned, it's very important to have a good knowledge of the area. And obviously, because surveys in the sea are very expensive, it's different to count birds in onshore compared to offshore. Offshore is very expensive, so we have a very poor knowledge of the challenges we have, of the environmental challenges we have offshore. And for example, in our wind farm in Normandy, we had performed on our side, on WPD, we had performed surveys to count birds offshore, so with boats and counting birds offshore. And what we identified was that the best spot was not the protected area, the Natura 2000 area, but an area which was close to that one. So it was a bit weird, and the rules were pushing us for the Natura 2000, but most of the changes were on the other area. So what we preferred was to push to change the rule and to allow putting a wind farm in the protected area, which was quite theoretical, rather than in the real environmental challenge. And we have done that with the NGOs, and we have shared with them the studies and the surveys we had. And then doing that way, we have really created a good partnership with them. So it's really about, with NGOs, it's really about making studies, sharing studies, and building together the right location. And then the first example and the first challenge is about tourism and landscape. Obviously, this very depends on the distance from the coast where you put the wind farm. If you talk about 100 kilometers, the challenge is less. But for our first wind farm in France, we are talking about 12 kilometers. So there is a challenge. And every city in France, every coastal city is emblematic. If you go to Evry-Mayor, they will tell that they have the highest tourism in France and the best spot for that. So every spot is really a challenge. But we have, for one of our Normandy project, we are really in a good spot. We are in front of Étretat cliffs. And then this was a challenge to put on the right location. And again, here it's about dialogue. As I said, I go fast, sorry, but I just end on the landscape. So Étretat, we will see from there, and really about dialogue and going into the detail, because our first approach for this wind farm was to put it on the side of the beach of Étretat, meaning going to a cliff. But when we started to work and to share pictures and projection of the wind farm with the locals, they said, no, in fact, what we want in Etretat is to get a picture of the cliff without the wind farm. So put it in the middle and just preserve the cliffs for photography. And then this is what we achieve. And again, together, partnership with the locals at that time. But again, it's important to be fast in the development phase, because the people with whom we had the agreement before, they are not anymore in responsibility, and the new ones doesn't have all this history in mind. So it's important to be fast in your development. This is really about this national development and really the commitment from national politics.
Thank you, Vincent. Very, very interesting reflections and concrete examples. And I heard at least 2 do's, dialogue, and then be ready to actually adapt on the recommendations you get. And I thought it was interesting. You also pointed to a couple of the don'ts, because we're very willing to share our best practice and our success cases, but we have gone wrong on some points, and that long time horizon obviously has been a challenge, that people don't get what was promised 10 years ago. With that, let me ask, just in the interest of time, I'll ask 2 questions at the same time to all of you. Let me challenge you to share a couple of those zones. Where have we gone wrong? Why is there so much resistance in some of these projects? Are there some additional don'ts that you can share? And perhaps as a second question, as France and Norway develop their offshore wind industry, is there anything France and Norway or the international community can do together to address some of these issues? We have with us some key government and institutional officials, businesses, policy models, concrete action. What could we actually do together to move this forward? Let me start with you, Bru.
Thank you. If I were to try to just bring it down to 2 points, since we don't have a lot of time left. I agree with a lot of what you said. I think that is the biggest don't, possibly. And this is pulling on our experience from developing onshore wind in Norway, where this was exactly the issue. From the time you were given the concession until you actually realized the project, too many years went by. And because we were so eager to develop this new industry, because this was also a new industry in Norway only a few years ago, we weren't strict enough on environmental demands. We weren't strict enough on how the wind farms were going to look. I mean, the size of them, how many turbines, etc. We didn't think about that. So by the time some of these concessions actually were realized, the projects had really changed from what people had said yes to maybe 10, 12 years earlier. And that created a lot of conflict locally where these parks were to be built. So to just make sure in our eagerness to lift this new industry for both our countries, to not jump ahead, miss a few steps, to not think through what kinds of demands we need to have in place to make sure it's developed in a sense that will be good for everyone and not give us a backlash once we start realizing the projects, because we don't really have that time. I mean, climate change is so dire. We have a huge need for more renewable energy. We need to harness the potential in wind offshore. So we can't afford to have a backlash in 10 years because right now we didn't do this process well enough. That's a big thing. And then the second point, I think, whether it's Norwegian companies operating here in France or French companies operating in Norway, hopefully on offshore wind, I think it's important to remember how important local content actually is. To work well together in the industry as well, to make sure that whatever you're doing offshore along the coastline in some country actually provides jobs and growth and value creation onshore in that country, in that local community. Just to give one short example, in Haugesund, which is a town on the west coast of Norway, they have a shipyard placed basically right in the middle of the city, smack middle of the city. And I mean, it makes noise. There's always stuff going on there. But the city is so proud of that shipyard and all the jobs it's created, everything that's been built there. It's like a monument for success for the city. But they also have one wind turbine that's placed out by the coast, just one. You can see it from the city center. And people hate it so much. I mean, you can't really hear it. It's nothing, but it doesn't give that same sense of proudness, that feeling that look at what we built, what we created, this contributes to something. And of course, one wind turbine is not going to make that difference, but you see my point? It's about having that connectivity between what you're actually realizing somewhere maybe deep away offshore, but it shows onshore. It gives back to the people. It's something that's worth being for, not just because it's value creation for some government or provides electricity that we all need, but it actually gives local jobs. So I think that's maybe the biggest, it's a do, it's not really a don't, but if you don't do that, you have a problem, I think. But thank you for having me on the panel.
Oh, and thank you for being candid also about some of the mistakes made onshore. We're at the onset and wise reflections. In the interest of time, let me just perhaps jump to you, Gro. One don't, and then we would like to hear Phil, who represents all of these stakeholder groups in many ways, to just give us a last punch on what to bear in mind. But Gro.
Yeah, sure. Well, one don't. I think one thing we've not been able to do correctly in France is planning, giving visibility to stakeholders. We have been developing wind farms and the connections really very much on a case-by-case basis up to now. We're progressing, but we need to progress even more in order to be able to optimize the marine space between all the needs of all the users, the fishermen, the environmental protection interests, the marine developments, of course. So this is really what we need to have a more thorough and clear planning of space, volume, and the grid, of course. And going to a do right afterwards, and maybe some interest for cooperation between Norway and France. We're working together in what we call a renewable grid initiative in Europe. It's a coalition between NGOs and TSOs. And when we're working especially on enhancing environmental knowledge, data, getting them all together to have a complete comprehension. And I think this is something Norway could also join. We need to do more of it in France in order to have a full common database of this environmental knowledge. So this is really key to be able to build sound environmental project for the future.
Well noted. And Phil?
No specific don't and do. But maybe as a representative of all the parties, make sure that everybody accepts that ocean is a common good. I mean, we need obviously to work together, and it looks like, sounds like the developers they already accept that, and they are ready to change things, to adapt the way they're going to develop the farms with respect to the other users. So I think fishermen and others, not only fishermen, they need to do the same thing. I mean, we have restricted area for military or for navy. Nobody complains and nobody say anything about it. Why it would be the same thing for wind farm or for other marine renewable developments? So common goods would be the thing that it needs to be accepted by everybody.
Thank you. Wise comment. Thank you all for sharing your reflections. I will not attempt in 30 seconds to make a summary of this very, very rich exchange, but I have noted that thinking local content and thinking local value creation and communicating that up front seems to be a key point. Dialogue, and building real coalitions between some of these stakeholders, be they fishermen, environmental institutions, naval representatives, and others, and be ready to change your plans based on actually their input. I heard from several ones. Then last but not least, share some of the don'ts or the experiences and the lessons learned the hard way, and work together to perhaps move this forward, because we have a common interest across countries to actually realize this potential and realize it very fast. With that, maybe I can pass to you a final concluding remark, Matthew, on how might we work together on this moving forward.
Thank you very much, and many thanks for the very interesting discussions that we had. Actually, we launched a task force, Franco-Norwegian task force, in the frame of the Franco-Norwegian Chamber of Commerce that works on oil and gas and now offshore wind, clean energies, more and more. And we will deal with this kind of topics, also cost reduction, acceptability, and also, let's say, environmental dialogue, innovation, and we'll be glad to deepen these topics. And also, we will meet in November in Saint-Malo, Brittany, Of course, Madam Minister, you would be more than welcome to speak about floating offshore wind again. And I think that social intelligence will be the key to be successful in this project. Thank you for the organization and for the excellent parity that we had, excellent parity on the panel. It's not that often in France. And I think that when you are more than you reflect to the society, you have more chance to be successful in the project. So it should start like this. Thank you.
Let's aim to invite some of these other groups mentioned to the next panel. Let's aim to have also this topic, I would, if I can add, in the main program. It is not a side issue. It's very central to offshore wind development, it seems. And let me also just extend thanks to our distinguished panel today for sharing your experiences and knowledge on this topic. Thank you for being brave participants, both here and online. And welcome to a small cocktail reception in the restaurant just across the lawn to close off this very exciting exchange. Thank you.